Hello, hello, hello. So I'm going to be continuing on Chapter 4 from The Flame of a Candle by Gaston Bachelard. 4. Poetic Images of the Flame in Plant Life. I no longer know if I am sleeping, for the light is vigilant in the heliotrope. Celine Arnold, Anthology. 1. When dreaming, a little of the voices. Hold on. When dreaming, a little of the forces that maintain each object's particular form. One can easily imagine that in each vertical being there reigns a flame. That is, the flame is the dynamic element of upright life. I previously cited a line from Novalis. The tree is nothing other than a flowering flame. And this theme I will now illustrate by recalling the images that are endlessly reborn in the imaginations of poets. Before recounting the exploits of the poetic imagination, perhaps it is necessary to repeat that a comparison is not an image. When Blaise de Vignan compares the tree to a flame, he simply brings words together without really succeeding in harmonizing plant and flame vocabulary. Let us cite a passage that appears to be a good example of prolix comparison. Hardly has Vignan spoken of the flame of a candle than he speaks of the tree. In a similar way to the flame, it has its roots fixed in the earth, from which it takes its nourishment as the candle end does from the tallow, wax, or oil that makes it burn. The trunk that draws its juice or sap is like the candle end, where the fire subsists on the liquid that it attracts to itself. The white flame is the branches and boughs adorned with leaves, the flowers and fruits which manifest the final end of the tree are the white flame to which everything is reduced. Throughout this extended comparison, we never grasp a single one of the million igneous secrets that remotely account for the flamboyant explosion of a flowering tree. Guided by poets, I shall try to seize on images in primal poetry, born of details worthy of elaboration, seeds of living poetry that we can make live within us. 2. When the image of the flame is thrust on a poet with its truth about the plant world, it must consist of a single phrase. To explicate it, to develop it, would be to drag it out, to halt the momentum of an imagination unifying the intensity of fire and the patient strength of foliage. Image phrases that tell of plant flames, that paint them, are just so many polemical acts for countering common sense with its dull ways of seeing and speaking. But with a new image, the imagination is so certain of possessing one of the world's truths that a polemic against the unimaginative would be a waste of time. It would be better for the imaginer speaking to imaginers to make fresh statements again and again about the flames of plant life. Thus begins the reign of decisive images, poetic decisions. All poetry is a beginning, I propose to designate these image phrases, pregnant with the will for new expression, by the name Poetic Maxims. The term fragment, used by fragmenters, is unjust. Nothing is fragmented. Nothing is fragmented in an image that finds strength through condensation. With a dictionary of beautiful maxims from the dogmatic imagination, a botany of all the plant flames cultivated by poets, one might perhaps decipher the dialogue of the poet with the world. It will always be difficult to give order to a large number of deliberately unusual images, but sometimes an alluring passage, some odd image, is enough to show the relationship between two different genres. For example, how can one not have the impression that Victor Hugo and Balzac belong to the same family of dream botanists when these two poetic sentences are placed side by side? Each plant is a lamp, its perfume is its light. Every smell is a combination of air and light. Every plant is a lamp, its perfume is its light. Every smell is a combination of air and light. Of course, in Balzac's aesthetics, it is the plant at its peak, the flower, that realizes this prodigious synthesis of air and light. A sort of Baudelarian correspondence is activated by heights and summits, as though what is of value at the summit stimulated what is of value at the base. Thus, the dreamers who live out in both directions, this correspondence between fragrance and light, read with conviction and thought that gives value to delicate light. Certain trees become more fragrant when they are touched by the rainbow. 3. From an outstanding poet, one can receive the very germ of an image that is even more concentrated than a poetic maxim, an image seed or a seed image. An image seed or a seed image. The following bears witness to a flame that burns in the innermost being of the tree, where all of the promise of flamboyant life resides. Loys Gill, in a poem entitled The Old Oak, with 3 words, fills us with reveries. Pyre of sap, he says, in order to glorify the great tree. Pyre of sap. Words never before spoken, the sacred seed of a new language that must envisage the world poetically. The poetic maxim is left to the reader's care. A million poetic maxims will be dreamed of in this igneous sap that gives the strength of fire to the king of trees. As for me, awakened from my old images by the gift of the poet, I leave the great image of the great being twisted in sufferings like Laocoon, and dreaming of this sap that rises and burns, I sense that the tree is a fire bearer. And a great destiny for the oak is predicted by the poet. This oak is the vegetable Heracles, who, in every fiber of his being, prepares for his apotheosis in the flames of a pyre. A world of cosmic contradictions is born from this nexus of hostile powers. Loys Gill has linked fire and water together in 3 words. That is surely a triumph of language. Only poetic language can be so daring. Here we are truly in the domain of a tree and creative imagination. 4. Sometimes it is as if the language seed is exuberant. It shoots up in one burst to the extremes of its splendor. In a single image, Jean Corberet confers a flame like meaning on a solitary water jet, that upright being, more upright than all the trees of the garden. Colbert's water jet. What a great privilege it is to give one's name to an uncreated image. It is, for me, the flame of spirited water, the fire that splashes to its full height, to the limit of its upright action. There are gardens where burns a solitary water jet among the rocks at dusk. The poet provides us with the enormous pleasure of speech. Through him, we transcend elementary differences. The water burns. It is cold, but it is strong, and so it burns. It gains the virtue of an imaginary fire by a sort of natural surrealism. Nothing is deliberate, nothing is fabricated by this immediate surrealism of the water jet flame. Jean Courbet has concentrated the surrealism of his image into a single word, the word burn, which de-realizes and surrealizes. And this single word, burn, has overthrown the poem's crepuscular melancholy. Crepuscular, crepuscular, crepuscular. And the word burn has overthrown the poem's crepuscular melancholy. The image achieved is thus a witness of creative melancholy. Such a synthesis, such a fusion of objects embodied in such different forms, like the synthesis of water, jet, and flame, of tree and flame, could hardly have been expressed in prose. It needs the poem and its suppleness, its poetic transmutations. A hymn seizes upon the being of images and makes of them a subject, a hymnal subject. It is the hymn itself that is the synthesizing power. The Mexican poet Octavio Paz knows this well, saying very precisely that the hymn is at once poplar of fire, water jet. Here again, the poet leaves to the reader the task of interpolating. Here again, the poet leaves to the reader the task of interpolating phrases. Here again, the poet leaves to the reader the task of interpolating phrases. The poetic pleasure of writing poetic maxims which unite the flame of the tree launched upwards and the vertical flame of the water jet. With the poets of our times, we enter into a realm of blunt poetry that does not chatter away, but always desires to live in primal speech. We must listen to poems as though we must listen to poems as though they were words heard for the first time. Poetry is wonder, quite precisely at the level of speech, in speech, and by speech. I shall seize on every opportunity to speak enthusiastically of autonomous poetic values. But I must return to my more specific intentions of studying the plant images of the flame by arriving at simpler examples of the relationship between lights, flowers, and fruits. 5. A tree is much more than a tree, says a poet. It rises toward the most precious light of its being, and that is why in many poems, fruit-bearing trees are lamp bearers. The image is very natural in the poetry of gardens. All of these lights in the summer foliage nourish fire. One of Dickinson's characters confides that when he was a child, he thought that birds' eyes were so bright, perhaps because the berries that they lived on in the winter were so bright. In a lecture on Matisse's paintings entitled The Poetry of Light, Ascension, Surrealism, quotes an Oriental poet who said, "Oranges are the lamps of the garden." Sorel also quotes Marcel Fleury. In the apple trees, the fruits shine like lamps. But these images are too brief. They are terminal. They do not follow the course of long reveries that see in the transforming tree the sap of life as a substance of fire and flame. When the August sun has fermented the first sap, fire slowly appears in the grape cluster. The grape brightens. The cluster becomes a brightness that shines under the shade of large leaves. The modest vine leaf must have found its first use in hiding the cluster. Ascension of fire, ascension of light. The poets of cosmic reveries choose between these two images. Bachelard in his youth, the vine, absorbing all the fires of the earth through its viral stock, gives the cluster this satanic sugar distilled in the violence of the volcano. Man's intoxication brings the madness of the vine to its fulfillment. A poet tells of the union of three movements in every tree: tree fountain, tree spout, arc of fire. There are trees that have fire in their buds. For Dionysio, the laurel is a tree so warm that when pruned, its trunk is soon covered with buds like green sparks. 6. A Novalis dreamer will easily accept the following formula as one of the axioms of the vegetable world's poetics. Flowers, all flowers, are flames. Flames that want to be light. This becoming light is what every dreamer of flowers feels. It is brought to life by going beyond what one sees, going beyond reality. The poet dreamer lives in the radiance of all beauty, the reality of unreality. The poet who does not have the painter's privilege of creating with colors has no interest in rivaling the glamour of painting. Caught by the rigor of his discipline, the poet, this painter in words, knows the clamor of freedom. He must speak the flower, say the flower. He can only understand the flower by enkindling the flames of the flower with the flames of speech. Poetic expression is, then, that evolution of light which every Novalis dreamer has sensed in his philosophic contemplations. The poet's problem is thus to express the real by means of the unreal. As I indicated in my preface, he lives in the chiaroscuro of his being, by turns bringing a glimmer of light or a penumbra to the real, and each time giving an unexpected nuance to its expression. But let us look into some poetic expressions of various flower flames, subtly colored according to the poet's genius. We may begin with images in which the flower flames might have been borrowed, like reflections of a setting sun. The sky grows dim and the chestnut trees burn, writes John Boldilite. The tall foliage of autumn chestnut trees plays its part in the symphony of the setting sun. Thus, if the poem is taken in its totality, it is easy to imagine that every tree has its own effect of light. The blazing fire at the heights comes down into every flower of the garden. Boldiletit's poem ends with this grand line: the dahlias have kept the embers of the sun. When I read such a poem pyrophorically, I can feel the unity of fire between sun, tree, and flower. Unity of fire? Even the unity of action is conferred upon the world by poetic expression. In the work of the same poet, there are other, more individualized flame flowers. Is not a red tulip a cup of fire? Is not every flower a type of flame? Tulips of copper, tulips of fire, twisted in the warmth of this month of May. If you put the garden tulip on your table, you have a lamp. Put a red tulip, just one, in a long-necked vase. Sitting by it in the solitude of a solitary flower, you will have candle reveries. In a note, Bernardin de Saint-Pierre writes, Chardin says that in Persia, when a young man presents a tulip to his mistress, he wants her to understand that he, like this flower, has a countenance of fire and a heart of glowing coal. Indeed, at the bottom of the calyx, the wick of the torch is completely blackened. When the flower is a quiet lamp, an undramatic flame, the poet finds words which are the bliss of speech. The blue pins burned like soft lamps. Here in the realm of speech itself is a moist flame that flows in its labile syllables. I imagine a beautiful, tender woman who repeats these two lines again and again while looking at herself in the mirror. Her lips would be happy. Her lips would learn to flower gently. Of all flowers, the rose is a veritable image earth of imaginary plant flames. It is the very embodiment of imagination eager to be convinced. What intensity there is in this single line by a poet who dreams of a time when the fire and the rose are one. In order to give double value to each image, they must harmonize in both directions. A dreamer of roses must see an entire rose bush in his fireplace. Sometimes flowers seem to be born in the flaming coals. Thus, Pierre de Mandiargues writes, the fire of geraniums illuminates the coal. What is the origin of this great red and black dream? The flower or the fireplace? For me, The poet's image works both ways, and in both instances violently. Everything depends on the poet's temperament. For Nkvist, it is the placid cornflower. The cornflower rises electrically in the cornfield and threatens the harvest like the flame of a blowtorch. The lamp and the rose exchange their gentleness. Rodenbach, a man of gentle images, writes, "The lamp in the bedroom is a white rose. In his house of 100 mirrors, Rodenbach cultivated imaginary flowers. Again, he writes, the lamp that makes water lilies blossom in mirrors. His reverie of reflection is so cosmogonic that he has created the vertical pool. In this way, the poet covers the walls of his room with paintings of water lilies. Nothing can stop an imaginer who sees flowers in every light. A more ardent poetic temperament will express the fire of roses with greater passion. Dionysio's work is rich in roses. Dionysio's work is rich in roses of fire. One reads in the great novel, Fire, look at the red roses. They are flaming. They seem to have live coal at the heart. They are flaming really. This remark is so simple that it may seem trite to a reader skimming over it. But the writer wanted to present this as a dialogue of two lovers in the fire of passion. Red flowers can put their stamp on someone's life. The dialogue resumes a few lines further. Look, they become more and more red. Bonifazio's velvet. Do you remember? It is the same strength. The image reverses in another passage where Dionysio presents the work of glass blowers. It is molten glass that evokes the name of a flower, a new proof, a new proof of the reciprocal action between the two poles of a dual image. The unformed vases trembled at the end of the irons, half rosy and half bluish, like clusters of hydrangea about to change color. Correlatively, then the flower, correlatively, then the fire flowers, and the flower lights up. These two corollaries could be developed endlessly. Color is an epiphany of fire, and the flower is an antiphony of light. Correlatively, then the flower. Okay, I see what he did there. Correlatively, then the fire flowers and the flower lights up. These two corollaries could be developed endlessly. Color is an epiphany of fire, and the flower is an antiphony of light. 7. When we experience the flower world, we are in a state of dissipating imagination. When we experience the flower world, we are in a state of dissipated imagination. We hardly know how to receive them in all the intimacy of their being, as witnesses of a world of beauty, a world that multiplies its beautiful beings. Yet each flower has its own light. Every flower is a dawn. A dreamer of the sky should find in each flower a color of sky. So it would be in a reverie that through a will to life in the heights imparted super Baudelairian correspondences to all things. Harry Corbin introducing a scholarly article entitled Sympathy and Theopathy Among the Fidelis d'Amour in Islam quotes Proclus, as he alludes to, the heliotrope and its prayer. What other reason as Proclus, can be given for the fact that, insofar as possible, the heliotrope follows the movement of the sun, and the selenotrope follows that of the moon. Whatever reason, as Proclus, can be given for the fact that, insofar as possible, the heliotrope follows the movement of the sun, and the selenotrope follows that of the moon, like a funeral procession, like torches, unless we admit that there are causal harmonies, intersecting causalities between beings of the earth and the sky. For truly everything prays according to the rank that it occupies in nature, and sings the praise of the Lord, of the divine life to which it belongs, spiritual praise, and rational or physical or tangible praise. For the heliotrope moves according to its freedom of movement and in its course. If one were able to catch the sound of the air stirred by its movement, one would realize that it is a hymn to his king, such as a plant might sing it. At what level, at what height should one meditate upon Proclus's text? Above all, it is necessary to feel that in order to achieve height, Proclus develops all heights within himself: fire, air, light. Everything that rises also partakes of the divine. Every dream unfolded is an integral part of the flower's being. The life flame of a being that flowers is a straining toward the world of pure light. And all of these evolutions are the happy evolutions of slow movement. Torches in the gardens of the sky, in harmony with the flowers in men's gardens, are unfailing and slow flames. Sky and flowers harmonize to teach slow meditation, meditation that prays. If we read further in Corbin's pages, we must open ourselves unreservedly to the dimensions of height, a height that gains the dignity of the sacred. For Proclus, the heliotrope, in its heavenly color, prays because it is always turned toward its Lord in conspicuous fidelity. Henry Corbin cites this Quranic line: every being knows the manner of prayer and glorification that is right for him. And Corbin shows that the tropism of the heliotrope is, for the Islamic fidelis de amor, heliopathy. 8. By dreaming naively of the images of the poets, we have accepted all the little miracles of the imagination. When poetic value is in play, it would be inappropriate to evoke other values, and also inappropriate to approach our study with a mind that is the least bit critical. To finish this little chapter, however, let us look at a text that I cannot help but see through the eyes of a man from Champagne. I take this anecdote from a very serious book. Sir James Frazer, without introduction or commentary, writes, when the Menri came into contact with the Malays, they found among them a red flower, Gantong, Malay, Gantang. They gathered in a circle around it and stretched their arms over it to warm themselves. In what follows, the anecdote becomes more complicated. In particular, a deer and a green woodpecker come into play. The green woodpecker, epitome of legendary birds, can easily carry the fire within its brilliant feathers to the tribesmen. Fraser provides many texts concerning legendary animals that are benefactors of man, and we learn to believe a little, just a little, in the legends that the ethnologists bring back to us. We become docile students in the school of naivete. But in the story of this Malayan family assembled around a banquet of ardent flowers to warm their fingers, the demon of irony seizes me and I reverse the axes of naivete. How the eyes of the good savages must shine with mischief when they present to the missionary this comedy of the floral origin of fire.